Great. So, well, thanks everyone for joining the session today. I apologize in advance for a weird voice that I have. Had to get an urgent dental procedure done. So hopefully this presentation is not going to be as painful as a dental appointment for you, but please ask any questions that you have during the presentation. If you're not comfortable asking any questions during the presentation, please feel free to send me an email and I'll be sure to respond. So without further ado, here we go. So we're talking about the, I'm sorry, I don't know, okay. So today what we're going to address is what a technology transfer office does. Most institutions have separate tech transfer offices. I will shed some light into what Sunnybrook's tech transfer office does as well. Another key component to know about or think about are intellectual property policies. They differ from institution to institution and is often an overlooked part by the scientists. So definitely something that you should be aware of. I'm also going to cover a very generic process of commercialization that we're looking at, just an umbrella view. A lot of organizations will have a more detailed process that they can perhaps share with you, but most of it would actually be covered in this generic process. And as important as it is to know what to do and what to look for, it's also important to know what not to do. So we'll also kind of go into a little bit of detail of what can go wrong. So tech transfer offices are like gatekeepers, essentially, of most research commercialization that happens at universities, at various institutions, even for-profit organizations. And one of the key aspects of any commercialization is the intellectual property, like that's your negotiating asset. So most tech transfer offices do manage all intellectual property that comes out of an institution. We're also looking at understanding what is the best way to move forward with a particular technology or research or an idea that comes forward. If we are unable to find or identify the best path, we will look for people who can help guide that discussion too. And other than that, we help facilitate collaborations with industry. If it's an idea that's not ready for, a product as of yet, if you're looking at maybe partnership with industry, or even if it's not industry, other academic institutions, etc., we help facilitate those discussions. If it's reached a stage where we feel, okay, now we need to kind of think of how to get money into this particular idea so that we can either set up a company, or if there is money that just needs to come in generally. So we're looking at working with other VCs and investors. And of course, there is a lot of legwork associated with this, especially around agreements. So we will help negotiate those agreements as well on behalf of the organization and university. As in addition to all this that a tech transfer office does, here at Sunnybrook, we also look after any material transfer agreements that need to be put in place to help with those academic collaborations. A lot of tech transfer offices also have separate contract officers involved, but at least here at Sunnybrook, we're a smaller team and we work with Sunnybrook Legal to help get these agreements in place. So intellectual property policies are often, they get lost in a conversation when you perhaps join a new institution or an organization, but definitely an important part to, definitely an important document to be aware of, because two key things that they talk about refer to the ownership of IP and also what the distribution of income looks like. So there are a lot of institutions where you may the inventor themselves own the IP. There is also a joint ownership format that's followed by some universities where the inventor leads the commercialization efforts, but it's owned jointly by the university and the inventor. And then there are institution-owned policies where the institution owns anything and everything that is developed on site or related to what your expertise is or what your work is at the institution. So here at Sunnybrook, it's an institution-owned policy. So SRI owns any invention or idea that you come up with. And after the whole ownership aspect is addressed, the next thing to think about is what if the commercialization is a success? And if that's and there we look at the distribution of the income or any equity also that somehow comes into play, because income is not necessarily just cash, it can be a non-cash consideration as well. Here at Sunnybrook, we have the income distribution is 40-40-20. That is, inventors get 40% of any income, Sunnybrook retains 40% of any income, and then the platform and or the program gets 20%. So, okay. So also, given the kind of network we have, at least here within Toronto, because a lot of hospitals, so we're called the Thousand Network, as I'm sure all of you are aware. And so given the associations and collaborations here within Toronto, it's very easy to have co-owned IP that comes up. So that's a very usual part of tech transfer here. And we often have interinstitutional agreements with other organizations or universities that we co-own the IP with. Those IIAs basically identify who's going to lead the commercialization, filing of the patent, etc. So that's something that the tech transfer offices also take care of. Okay. So what is the process of commercialization, essentially? So there are 4 links that you have to think about. The ideas themselves. It can be any idea that you come up with, and at whatever stage, it's essential to know what is perhaps the right stage to move this forward, and your tech transfer offices or your innovation and partnership offices can help answer those questions. Then as and when more people get involved in this discussion, the technology is assessed. There are a lot of parameters that you need to think of, and we'll go into the detail of those parameters later in the presentation. Also, we're looking at how can you add value to your IP or your invention or idea once you've assessed the technology, because I believe that the ideation or the work that needs to go in doesn't stop solely at the technology assessment, because while it of course answers those questions whether you should go forward or not, there may be other questions that you need to answer, and that's where you perhaps need to look at how do I add value to this idea to maybe make it more appealing, or that it can be just picked up by somebody, or appealing for funding. And then ultimately, of course, the endpoint being that what are the various ways that you can transfer the technology so that it's a product. Okay. Okay, sorry, I just saw a question. I will address this question at the end of the presentation, if that's okay. Okay. So talking about the first aspect, which is ideas. So of course, everybody knows about inventions, everybody knows about patents, but I will say that there are a number of formats that you can explore. It's not necessary that if it's not patentable, then it's not something worth protecting or moving forward with. That's not true. For inventions which are more tangible in form, I would say, and I say that very loosely because it's not always true. It can be a machine that you're working on, it can be a composition that you're working on, or any improvement to an IP that's already out there. So there are various forms that you can protect that invention. Patents is, of course, one that all of us are familiar with. But another thing to think about are trade secrets, which are becoming more and more popular, and that can be maybe associated with an algorithm that you've developed, which is perhaps not patentable, based on opinion of your counsel, or you just don't want to put it out there because it's easy to re-engineer. Given that there are a number of formats that you can look at, Sunnybrook, of course, has quite a mixture of these formats. I will say that we have licensed patents, of course, but we have also licensed trade secrets or know-how associated with that trade secret. So one can work with the different formats as well. The other thing that you should think about is authorship. So that's, of course, publication. One thinks only of publication or presentation or any form of disclosure, really. But copyrights associated with questionnaires or assessment tools, they become a very important part of maybe, the whole research that you're doing. And maybe there are other people who are interested in using those questionnaires or assessment tools. So if there are any such stages that you come by, it's important to kind of stop and think, is this something that other people want to use? So definitely bring it forward to the tech transfer offices, and they'll work with you to understand how you would want to see this evolve. To point out, like, one of our questionnaires that's registered under Sunnybrook's name is one of our main successes in terms of commercialization. And that's more or less perpetual, because unlike patents, which is bound to a 20-year term, we have copyrights, which is, of course, far longer. I will say that I'm not suggesting that patents are weaker than copyright in any way. Definitely patents are stronger. They offer more protection compared to a copyright. But just wanted to put it out there that there are other formats to think about. Okay, so the next thing that we're looking at, perhaps the most important part, is technology assessment. So there are various points that you'd want to think of. One is, of course, the stage of the technology. How early is it? Invariably, most tech transfer offices, or yourself actually, when you're conducting your research and you feel that this is something that has potential, it will be extremely early stage. But don't let that deter you, because it's important to kind of bring this to the attention of any experts or your innovation partnership offices or tech transfer offices to help make that decision whether it's the right point to take it forward or not. Because typical questions that are asked during that point are, is this something that's feasible? Has this been prototyped, made? Where is, what stage of development is it at? Also, what is the kind of data that's available to support this idea? So more the data, better it is. And like, the value just increases if you have, preliminary data, if you have any animal data, like nothing like it. But another unwritten aspect that we definitely kind of look into is the inventor commitment. So sometimes there is an idea that comes up. There's a lot of push to, file for protection for this idea, etc. But if the inventor is working on other different projects that perhaps are going to take more time or maybe time sensitive, that kind of plays into, making a decision on whether it's the right time to move forward with this or not. The next point to think about is, what is the kind of IP protection that we're thinking of? Is it a patent? Of course, they're more favored than any other, but we may also have a utility model or a design model that we would want to register. Trade secrets and copyrights, of course, as I just discussed. And another one to think of is a trademark, because I don't know if everybody's familiar with the story of Gatorade, because Gatorade came out of Florida, where it was a drink that their inventors made to support their football team called Gators. And so it was called Gatorade, and that got picked up. And then, of course, it evolved to Gatorade. So trademark played a huge part in that commercialization. So even though the core concept is the drink itself, but the trademark associated with it kind of made it more visible. So this is also something to think of. The next part, which is perhaps the more time-consuming part, is the market assessment and what does the regulatory pathway look like. So we don't usually put in a lot of effort if this technology is at an early stage to think about the regulatory part. But definitely looking at the market assessment is advisable. So we are looking at what is the market opportunity for this particular product, who would perhaps be the early adopters of this technology? What does the competitive landscape look like? Is it something that would be easy to replace or not? And of course, finding the fit is extremely critical. Does it address a particular need in the market? If yes, what does that problem solution fit look like? And also, what does that problem market fit look like? So, for instance, if you have developed a technology where you think, yes, it addresses the need of the market 100%. So it addresses the need of or the need in the technology space 100%. Great. So we have a problem solution fit, which is 100%. But if it's going to be more expensive than what the market is already paying for, then you need to think about, is the trade-off worth it? If it's not, then maybe it's not the best solution out there to put out there, or not to expect a lot of return in that regard. Sorry, so I have a question here, which I'll probably address. Okay, so this question, which talks about licensing IP from Sunnybrook, is something I can talk of again towards the end of the presentation, because I do talk about what are the forms of technology transfer, and then I can address this during that. Okay, so of course, you can look at getting market assessment done via a number of ways. You have library access to a number of market databases, especially at University of Toronto. Another thing that like Sunnybrook likes to do is liaise with students at universities. So like we partner with U of T Mississauga fairly regularly, especially with their M-Biotech students, to kind of answer these questions more in depth with service projects for them. So there are a lot of ways to kind of go about this to find the answers to any market related or regulatory related questions. Okay, so moving forward, the aspect that I think that does kind of add a little value, a little more value to your invention or idea, or does give you more to think about at this point are, of course, the Tech Transfer Office will help you file intellectual property. When you're filing IP, there are a number of questions that you're answering, whether it's talking about what exists in the prior art, what is, a person skilled in the art, what is he going to think about this technology? Is it very obvious to him? If not, how? And then, of course, there are a lot of questions that come up during the drafting of the application too. So it all kind of adds value into, okay, this is something that we can tweak a little bit, or this is something that we can work on moving forward or get some data for. It's important to note that you do not disclose your IP in any form of publication or disclosure, and this includes thesis. At least that's our recommendation, because thesis ultimately is something that may not be private for a very long time. So we want to make sure that there is some control over the disclosure of the IP. Also, if a provisional application has been filed, we always advise that any disclosure that you make of the IP is not outside the scope of what the protection's been filed for. And then coming to generating value, we're looking at, okay, somebody corrected me saying that actually a thesis is never private. You're perhaps right. I have no idea in terms of is it always or never, but yeah, like I said, recommended not to disclose your IP before you file for protection. So, okay, talking about generating value. So there are a number of categories to think about, and I'll go into detail in the next slide. And this can actually help develop maybe like a pitch deck based on these areas, and that also helps identify the loopholes, right? So for your technology. So let's talk about this in the next version, in the next slide. And then also looking at industry engagement and funding opportunities. So your tech transfer office can help engage industry in various ways. It can be for maybe service contract, where we just work with them with their compounds, or whatever their technology is. we don't own any IP, but maybe it helps us gain some insight into the technology space and what we want to do. Another thing to look at is sponsored research agreements. This is a very interesting format of engagement and it's been picking up quite a bit over the years, because it allows you to work with industry and thereby convert that perhaps moving forward into a license. Um, so it's a revenue generating model both for the university as well as for the industry partner. Your tech transfer officers also help engage with other not-for-profit organizations, like that can help you identify or move your invention forward. So moving your invention forward, I would say, is, for example, Admare. Admare is based in Vancouver currently, but it's a great partner to kind of work with if you want to kind of take your research forward but do not have the funding for it. So it is the format does come into a collaboration agreement more than just IP being owned solely by the university, but definitely something to think about if it's a good fit. Then, helping with education, an example is UTest. UTest is based out of University of Toronto, and it helps with, educating entrepreneurs who are interested in kind of taking that step into the world of entrepreneurship. And then, yeah, I think these are the two definitely to keep in mind, especially in the Toronto region. And of course, we have TAP. So TAP is Toronto Innovation Acceleration Partner, quite a mouthful, but it was initially Mars Innovation. Since they've remodeled, they've been renamed TAP. And they are a wonderful partner to work with, especially in the field of life sciences. They'll help connect you with other groups like CCRM, Downtown, and any other that they believe will add value to your technology. So your tech transfer office can help facilitate those conversations. It's just a matter of finding if your technology is a good fit to, start those conversations. So getting into the generating value bit that we spoke about, now we think that if the technology is at a stage where we file for protection already, where we have enough data to show us that it's a great fit for the market, it addresses the problem solution fit, it also addresses the problem market fit question that we'd raised initially, then we kind of go deeper into answering other questions around the market itself, who is going to adopt this technology, and what a business model would look like. So you don't have to think about these essentially at the point where you feel, great, I have an idea, let's disclose this technology to a tech transfer office, because this is going to be a lot of work. But this is something that your TTO can work with you. So these are questions to answer a little later once you file for IP. So please don't get involved in answering these questions from the get-go, because the longer you delay disclosing your IP to your TTOs, it's going to take longer to actually reach a point where a decision's made and patents filed, etc. So the market question that you're wanting to answer, of course, they're very usual in terms of, is this market large and growing? What does that growth rate look like? What is the barrier to entry to kind of gain a foothold in this market? And are there any receptors that you can identify? And by receptors, I mean, it may be industry, it may, like, are there any particular companies that are working in this field that we can maybe approach or work with, who may be of interest, who are perhaps looking to collaborate? So there are a number of questions for market that you can answer. And then for adoption also, this is not a very critical part of generating value, but definitely something to think about if your technology has reached that stage, is in terms of who makes or loses money, because of course the trade-off needs to be right too. And who is going to control the patients if this kind of goes into the whole clinical trial process, etc. So not something to think about right now, but Definitely something to keep in mind. And then for business model, this is a question that we usually tend to ask a lot, especially when we have devices. Um, how much is this going to uh, sell for? And that is based on how much do you make this for? So there are a number of devices now that, of course, you feel, yes, I can make this for a lower amount, but if it's going to sell for a low amount itself, maybe that gap is not enough to kind of justify this moving forward. Maybe we need to look at other formats of making this available to the market. So these are a few questions to keep in mind. Of course, like I said, not questions that you need to address right at the beginning of coming up with your idea. Always important to disclose your idea to your TTO, and yeah, take it from there. So your TTO will work with you to answer these questions or work on these questions. And we don't expect inventors or our PIs to know all these answers, but we're definitely looking to help you answer them. So, okay, so what are the formats of technology transfer? I have given a very short, actually a snippet of what the tech transfer looks like here in Canada, specifically talking about Ontario. So there were 41 startups that were founded in 2020. This is from the autumn licensing survey that most Canadian institutions fill out, including Sunnybrook. Some of us do not give all the information that's requested, but it's a very nice starting point to kind of see what Canada's academic world looks like in terms of commercialization. So the number of formats that we have are either you can establish startups. So inventors themselves go ahead and start a company, and your university or institution, if they own the IP, they may have different ways of how they engage with the startup that you've established. If they can fund your startup, that's a question. Do they have special terms for inventors from their organization? That's a possibility. What are the incentives, equity, etc.? So those are questions that are answered if that's the route that you kind of take forward. I will say this, that it should not be an opportunity to kind of lowball your institution as well, because rest assured that your TTO will push back if they feel that the terms are not favorable. The most common way of transferring technologies is through a license agreement. And it's a cleaner route of making sure that the product enters the market. There are some companies out there who feel that no, it's best to kind of sit on technologies, especially if your idea competes with their product in the market. Regardless, license agreements are the number one way of making sure that the product is out there. An increasing number of companies are also looking at option agreements, where they'll probably pay an option fee, for maybe a particular research or idea that you're working on, and they're interested in that idea, but the data is not enough for them to kind of go ahead and seek a license from you. So in that case, they may sign an option agreement, and if the data reaches a point where they're comfortable to move forward, then we sign a license agreement. So what are things that can go wrong? A couple of issues are, of course, related specifically to startups itself, but an important part to note is that the need aspect, and we've addressed this before, the problem solution fit and the problem market fit. Does it address the customer's need? Is an important question to answer. And if it does, is your customer going to buy this product? So like I discussed this earlier, if the cost that you are making this product at is extremely high, your whole cost of goods is going to be very high, then you'll sell it also at a higher rate. Is this something that your customer is going to buy? Something to think about. Also, sometimes, most often we see that there is somehow a disassociation of what the business looks like and what the science looks like. We've seen scientists who focus a lot on the science of the things, and do not focus on the business aspect of the product, which leads to maybe lower adoption rate, lower interest from the industry. So making sure that the disconnect doesn't happen is also important. If you establish a startup and go the startup route, it's possible that you may have team issues, and I'm sure that you would have read this time and again, because even investors, VCs, anybody that you talk to for funding ask you who your team is, and team is extremely important when it comes to a startup. So I've given two examples here, but take it with a grain of salt. But I believe that internal strife is the easiest way to kill a good idea. So definitely something to keep in mind. And while there is a lot of things to keep in mind and consider when you're looking at your inventions, it's also important to know that your ideas are valuable. It's a different story which ideas have potential, but all ideas are welcome. So don't let this kind of impede your research in any way, impede your ideas in any way, because all ideas are welcome. So with that, I'm done with my session. I'm quickly going to answer the questions that I received in the chat first, and then if you have any other questions, I'm happy to address those. Okay, so the first question that I got was around 20% that goes to the platform and or program. What does that mean? So that is very specific to Sunnybrook. It is not specific to other institutions. So whenever we have money that comes in, 20% of that actually goes to maybe the platform or the program that the inventors are from. So at Sunnybrook, we have the physical sciences, biological sciences, evaluative clinical sciences as the three main platforms. And under them, we have various programs. So like, for instance, Medventions is part of the Schulich program. So it's likely that, the inventors would be associated with either a platform or a program, or both of them. So we kind of let the platform and the program director understand what is like what the distribution of that 20% looks like. The next question that I have is, could you please talk more about the pathways available to a resident within Sunnybrook or UFT if they decide to commercialize their inventions through entrepreneurship? Is licensing IP from Sunnybrook the only way to do this? So I cannot talk about UFT because University of Toronto has a very different setup in terms of how they handle their intellectual property. I would advise you to reach out to the Innovations and Partnerships Office, who can help answer those questions. For Sunnybrook, yes, unfortunately or fortunately, I think it's a great thing that you can only license IP from Sunnybrook if you're looking at entrepreneurship. We are currently also looking to, we also have a canned set of terms that we offer our inventors who want to be entrepreneurs. And so those are terms that are offered solely to our inventors. It's a confidential document. And so if you have any questions around that, I'm happy to talk offline. But essentially, we call it an express license. So it's offered to our inventors a canned set of terms that are non-negotiable. They are lower than what we usually offer industry based on the field of the technology. Okay, so the next question is, sorry, is that only if they use the TTO? I apologize, Sean, I'm not sure what this was in context to. Maybe you can send me another question, like just clarifying. I apologize, I missed the context around these questions that you sent. Okay.
Lucy, I think Sean was referring to the 20% that goes to the platform or the program, as far as I understand, but
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure if that's the context of his question. Um,
Okay, if that's the context of his question, okay, I think I've just okay. In general, if research from an academic lab leads to a startup, does the institution that funds the lab usually have some policy that gives them ownership, or is this something researchers can opt into? So I would say this for Sunnybrook again, not for U of T. Uh, Sunnybrook does not assign ownership to inventors. That's something that we do not do, even if it's a startup via the express license route. Um, there are discussions around perhaps royalty buyout, but assignment of ownership is something that Sunnybrook doesn't do at this point. I hope that answers your question, Sean. Okay, the next one. Prior to taking out IP, what is the best way to avoid disclosure while conducting research for proof of concept? Best way to avoid disclosure is a non-disclosure agreement, especially if you're discussing it with anybody outside your institution. Here at Sunnybrook, there is a non-disclosure thing that's kind of applicable to all inventors here, including clinicians. So you can have those discussions, but say for instance, you're at Sunnybrook, you're a U of T student studying at Sunnybrook, have come up with this idea while at Sunnybrook. It's important to have an NDA in place with U of T to discuss it with maybe your professor or supervising scientist, etc., who's stationed at U of T and not here at Sunnybrook. So it's advisable to have a non-disclosure agreement for sure. Even if it's a mentor that you're talking to, it's just best practice in our experience. Okay. Sorry, I just have a follow-up by Sean on the whole question that I answered earlier. He asked if Sunnybrook gets 40% of the ownership. No, that's not true. That's 40% of any income that's received by Sunnybrook. That's usually royalty or equity or any other fee that kind of comes in. So not ownership. Okay, next question. How can we protect our idea when speaking to partners who might fund our IP application? Is a provisional patent and a non-disclosure agreement enough? Do you recommend getting provisional patents or IP for Canada and US? So I think I answered the question as far as NDAs are concerned. And if you have a combination of both a provisional patent and an NDA, in my opinion, it's the best protection that you can have, especially if there is new data that you've kind of come up with that's not included in the provisional application. So in that case, we feel that it's a very good combination to have provisional patent protection and an NDA. So Sunnybrook usually goes the route of filing a provisional patent in the US. Most Canadian institutions do because it's easier to do so. It's also quicker to do so, and it's allowed. So why not? Because US and Canada are definitely the #1 priorities for most institutions. Okay, so the next question is, if a researcher is associated with both Sunnybrook and U of T, and the invention came from within Sunnybrook, does U of T take a percentage too? I'm asking this because they're all part of UHN. I'm sorry, I think I would say that UHN is in fact affiliated to U of T, but all three organizations are different. They operate differently. They have separate tech transfer offices. They have separate policies in place. So like I mentioned, if there is a U of T student who's at Sunnybrook, the invention is owned by Sunnybrook. If there is no University of Toronto contribution in any way. And if that's the case, U of T does not get a percentage. It's owned solely by Sunnybrook. If, however, there is a co-invention, then under the interinstitutional agreement, there is a percentage discussion that happens. Okay, so the next question is, so whether it's ownership, income, royalties, etc., do most academic institutions have policies guaranteeing them this in the event that research at their institution leads to a startup, or is it some sort of optional agreement? Okay, so intellectual property policies in place right now. Some institutions do address royalties and equity in terms in case of a startup separately. At Sunnybrook, as of now, it talks solely of income. That's royalties or any non-cash consideration is a discussion that happens if once it reaches that stage. Sunnybrook is in the process of updating its IP policy to address these very issues of equity, of royalties, of ownership, etc. But ownership component really doesn't change. That's still solely owned by Sunnybrook. We do not have a separate agreement that we sign specifically around like equity, especially, and sorry, also to clarify, income includes royalties. So that's addressed in our IP policy. But if you're talking about non-cash consideration, whether it's equity or share distribution, we have had instances where we have a separate agreement with the inventors. In some cases, it's kind of written into the share holders agreement itself, and there's no separate agreement per se. So it's really subjective. It's not objective in that sense. I hope that answers your question. Are there any other questions?
Yes.
Oh, okay. But the inventors can't separate entirely from such. No, you can't. You can't. The ownership component stays, but the separation can occur definitely on a royalty concern that you can buy out royalty. Like we can have clause within a license agreement with the inventors where we talk about you can buy out the royalty at a later date.
Thank you very much, Drishy. That was very comprehensive and a very insightful presentation. I do have a couple of questions for you.
Yeah.
So you talked about trade secrets, and I'm just wondering, based on your experience, when shall an innovator consider a trade secret as opposed to filing a patent? Is there like a criteria that an innovator could utilize to determine which type of IP right better suits the innovation?
I would say that, again, this is a little subjective. I would say that the best way to kind of identify if this is suited to a trade secret is it something that can be worked around easily? Is it something that one can identify, oh, this is clearly the composition, or something, so if it can be re-engineered quickly by somebody who works in the same field, maybe it's best suited for a trade secret. But in most cases, and that's why for patents, they want to, they ask you that question if a person skilled in the art would be able to answer that question. Is it going to be obvious to them? If not, then a patent, if yes, if it would be obvious, they won't grant a patent, right?
Yeah.
So, and it's also around the trade secret aspect, again, like I said, is associated with what the trade-off looks like at the end of the day. If it's re-engineered, do we have like what's our negotiation asset at that point? So
okay.
If you, yeah,
that makes sense. Yeah, thank you very much. The other thing you mentioned was about that innovators should try and disclose their ideas with the TTO at an early stage. So I'm just wondering, can you clarify what stage are you referring to? And is it fair to say that innovators should file a disclosure as soon as the invention is clearly conceptualized? And the reason why I'm asking is sometimes it's very challenging to determine the right time the nature of the beast is that sometimes you really need to do a lot of testing and validation of your idea, and sometimes there are certain aspects of the invention that remain unclear, even though there are some aspects that might be unique. So what do you recommend innovators do, or to go about this process, and when would be the right time?
Okay, so I would say that, and I'll get to why I say that you should disclose it as early as possible. But according to me, the right time to disclose it is as soon as there's any preliminary data or the device has been prototyped, something to support the idea. It doesn't have to be comprehensive, and it doesn't have to be, a big sample size. It can be 5 points or 5 samples that you're working with, or it's just prototyped, right?
Hmm.
That's perhaps the right time to disclose it. Your TTO is going to look into it in greater detail. And so if they feel, no, this is not the right time to go ahead and file for any IP, or we need more information, we let you know. The reason I say also that it's important to kind of disclose this as early as possible, it's possible there are other organizations that are working on on this research, on the
Right.
very idea that you're working on. And when a patent is filed, it may be so similar that it comes down to what is the first date of maybe recording of this IP. So that date of disclosure that goes into our docket may serve as proof that no, it was disclosed to us first. So we get to own that patent even if it's similar.
Okay, yeah, that
Yeah.
makes sense. And I think there's a lot of value in reaching out early to the tech transfer office. And again, you provide lots of feedback and
Yeah, and I will also say this, tech transfer offices really vary in size. And that being said, of course, nobody wants to have additional work that they need to do. So if I'm saying this, it's just out of caution and not because, we want to take the IP away from you as soon as possible. No. At
right,
least at Sunnybrook, I will say this, we value our collaboration with our inventors. We rely on them a lot as well.
right.
So yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I'm sorry. Another question. So you mentioned public disclosure as something that would affect filing a patent. So what is considered a public disclosure? So for example, applying to a grant, like a MyTax grant, would this be considered a public disclosure?
It really depends on how much detail you give, right? So if you're talking about just the core concept, but you're not going into the details of the invention or something that or you're not disclosing something that would make it easy for somebody who has access to that information to come up with the exact same idea,
Yeah.
then it should be okay. But if you're talking to a company and you're like, look, I came up with this design, or this is what it does, even though you may not have shared data with them or figures with them, for that would count as public disclosure. um, Various grants have different levels of confidentiality associated with it. So I know, like, for instance, there are a lot of industry funding programs out there. There are stages that they've defined that anything that you tell us at this point would be confidential, but the first application that's made usually is not. So I recommend that, keep it as vague as possible, detailed enough for you to get the funding, but as vague as possible so that nobody can get the idea.
Okay. That sounds great. And sorry, I have just one last question. So what happens if, let's say, Sunnybrook decides it's not going to prosecute or maintain a patent? So what happens in that scenario?
So in that scenario, we'll work with the inventors to kind of come up with the right solution. There are, again, like I said, if the inventors are interested in taking this on, there's an option to either license this technology from us, or and this is in rare cases now, but we can either assign this technology to you, but that's rare now here at Sunnybrook.
Okay. Well, sounds great. Thank you very much, Trishi, again. Any more questions from the audience? I don't see any questions. Well, with that, thank you again, Drishy. It was very
Thanks so
great
much.
pleasure having you this evening. So we're going to end a little bit early than 5:30, and we're going to take a break and then come back at 6 p.m. And on the second part of today's session with Steve Leonard and the prior art search exercise. So see you shortly.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
Drishy.